size, I use 2.75 meters of rayon, muslin as my interlining, elastic band, thread that matches the fabric, and bra pads. You will find the pattern for this project linked below in the description box. You can print it using a professional printer or a domestic one. If you decide to print the patterns at home, you will need to assemble the pages as it is a puzzle to get the pattern in full scale. Instructions are listed on the pages and on the handbook that comes with the patterns as well. This pattern comes in intermediate size, which means that it was made to fit an average of measurements per size. So it is really important that you check your size based on your measurements. And if you need to make any adjustment, you do it directly on the paper before cutting it. For example, in my case, I will need to adjust the length of the dress because it's too long for me. So if by any chance you need to increase or decrease the length of your dress, you will follow the same procedure. First, you will measure the length of your skirt pattern, and then you will measure the length of your ruffle piece at the center of the pattern. So to get the total length of my piece, we need to add the skirt length plus the ruffle length. And to that amount, we need to reduce or remove the hem allowance and the seam allowance. For a medium size, my total length will be 41.25 inches. Now we're going to measure the desired length from your waist down. To reduce the length, we are going to use the actual pattern length that we just calculated before, and we are going to subtract the desired length. That will give you the amount that we will need to reduce. Now I'm going to mark 7.25 inches on my skirt pattern. We are not going to adjust the length on the ruffle or on the top. We are just going to touch the skirt pattern because it's the easiest way. So once we have the measurement, we are going to do exactly the same in both skirt pattern pieces, front and back. Before cutting your patterns, iron your fabric, adding enough steam to pre-shrink it. Cut the patterns following the instructions listed on them, and don't forget to transfer all the notches and information from the patterns to the fabric. Start sewing front pattern pieces. First, facing right side together, place the side front on top of the center top and matching the notches starting from the bottom notch until you get to the second notch. Hold the pieces together where the notch is and continue joining the seam. You can use pins to make it easier because this curved area can be a little bit tricky. Then stitch the pieces together using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Since the top of the dress will be self-lining, this procedure will be repeated twice. These princess seams are going to need a little bit of love, so we're going to start making some notches in the curved area, getting close to the seam but without cutting it. Then we're going to trim 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch from the seam depending on your fabric, and we're going to start pressing it first with the seams closed, and then with the help of a hand tailor cushion we're going to start pressing our seams open. I suggest you to make it step by step and take your time because these seams, as I mentioned before, can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to be pressing from the round side first, and once I have all my seam pressed from the wrong side, I'm going to give it a final press from the right side of the fabric. Attach front top pattern to the back top pattern facing right side together and stitch both pieces using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Then press the seams. I always press them closed first and then I'll press them open. Since the top is self-lining, we will repeat this procedure twice. Interlining is considered as an extra layer that we add on our garment. As you can see, this dress has a bow on the back, and if you're using a really lightweight fabric, you could want to use probably another layer inside to make it stiffer. If you decide that you want to do it, you don't have to, but if you decide to, what you need to do is just trim from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch from the seams to make this piece a little bit smaller, and in that way have less bulky seams. As an interlining, I'm using muslin, but you could use any fabric that you want. On the handbook, you can find a couple of options that I suggest you, but you can use wherever you want. Also, if you are wondering what is the difference between the interlining and the interfacing, is that in this case, the interlining that I'm using doesn't have glue, so I need to sew on the piece on the fabric. And if you decide to use interfacing or fuse, you just need to iron the piece and the heat transfer the glue and the piece will be attached right away. The only difference is that I wanted to show you how to do this extra step of creating the interlining in case that you want to do it in this way. It's optional and it's up to you. To attach the interlining, first we are going to place it on the wrong side of our piece. We are going to attach it with some pins to avoid movement, and then we're going to edge stitch the piece on top of the interlining. Then we are going to fold our piece in half, and with the help of our iron we are going to pre-crease it. Now we are going to stitch our piece, closing one of the ends and using half an inch of seam allowance. Once we have sewn the piece, we are going to cut the corners and we are going to trim a little bit of our seam. Then we are just going to open the end that we didn't sew, and we are going to flip our piece, getting the right side out. To do the straps, we are going to follow in some way the same procedure that we did with the bow. We are going to fold our piece in half, facing right side together. We are going to stitch it using half an inch of seam allowance, and we are going to leave one of the ends open to be able to flip the strap. We are going to repeat this in both pieces. Then trim 1/4 of an inch from the seam and flip the right side of the strap out. Now we need to press the straps to make them beautiful, and to do that I'm gonna place my seam line at the middle of the strap and I'm gonna start pressing. Then I'm gonna try the top on in the best way I can to verify if I need to make any adjustments on the seams. As a part of the design, I decided to add bra pads or cups. This step is completely optional, but if you decide to do it, you will need to place one of the top pieces facing wrong side, and then you will attach or place the cups in the bust area. You can try the piece on to verify that you place it in the right place, in the right way, and you can use triangular or rounded cups. To attach them, you will make some stitches at the edges of the cups, as I just showing right now, and you can do these stitches by hand or by machine. Take into consideration that if you do this by hand, they will not be visible at the front side of the fabric. So it's up to you what kind of stitch you want to use. Now it's time to clean finish the edge of the top with the sandwich technique. To do that, place one top piece open right side up, then place the bow back strap aligning the open edge that we left with the back raw edge of the top. Then add the top straps following the strap notches that are marked on the pattern. And finally, place the another top piece front side up, aligning carefully all the edges. Then stitch around all the piece, starting and finishing at the princess seams, leaving the waist open and using half an inch of seam allowance. After sewing, we need to make some notches where the seams ended. So just besides the princess seam, we are going to make a notch in each side of the top. This is going to help us release the seam in order to have enough seam allowance to attach the top later. Also, we are going to trim the corners and also the seam allowance to make them less bulky. Flip the top right side out, give it an overall press if you want, and you can top stitch if you decide to. I didn't, but if you want to do it, you can top stitch around the whole piece. Now it's time to work on the bottom of our dress. So we are going to attach back skirt pieces, placing right side together and stitch them on the center seam using half an inch of seam allowance. Also remember to serge the raw edges of the seam. Then make sure you press the seams. For lightweight fabrics, you can press them open or close, but in my case, I'm pressing the seams all open. Then close the skirt, joining back and front pattern together, sew them on the side using half an inch of seam allowance. For this garment, I recommend you to cut the ruffle piece once to get a nice and subtle flare. But if you want more volume, you can cut the ruffle piece twice and attach it on the sides. Take into consideration that in that way you will need to gather the ruffle even more. Close the ruffle piece facing right side together and use half an inch of seam allowance. If you cut the piece once, you will have just one seam that will be located on the back of the piece. But if you decide to cut it twice, you will have two seams which will be placed on the sides of the piece. Add 2 rows of stitches on the top line of the ruffle using your longest stitch. The first stitch should be located 1/4 of an inch from the fabric edge, and the second stitch will be located 3/8 of an inch from the fabric edge. Remember to leave long tails and do not backpack. Now pull the threads to make the ruffle fits on the bottom seam of the skirt. If you cut the ruffle once, you most likely will be easing the ruffle, so you will have a small amount of gathers. But if you cut the piece twice, you will end up with a good considered amount of gathers there. To attach the pieces together, I recommend you to mark with some notches the centers, front, back, and the sides, if needed, of both pieces, the ruffle and the skirt. Sew pieces facing right side together and using half an inch of seam allowance. It's important to hide the previous two stitches, which means that our seam needs to be at least 1/8 of an inch above the previous stitches. Then close the waistband, folding it in half, facing right side together. Stitch it using half an inch of seam allowance and mark the centers and sides of the waistband. To attach front and bottom together, we will use the sandwich technique. Following the top placement notches on the skirt front pattern, place the top piece facing right side together, and then place on top of both pieces the waistband piece, with wrong side up. We will use this waistband piece to create a channel where we are gonna add the elastic band. We are gonna stitch the piece around all the waist using half an inch of seam allowance. Then understitch the waistband seam, making sure the seam is placed towards to the waistband and is wrapped under the stitch. Fold the waistband to the wrong side of the fabric and press it to keep it in place. Stitch the waistline 1 3/4 of an inch from the fabric edge. This stitch will create a channel to insert the elastic band. So, stitch around the waistline and leave an open space or escape hole to insert the elastic band later on. In the handbook, you will find the suggested measurement for the elastic. However, consider that the measurement may vary depending on how elastic the band is. It is recommended to place the elastic band around your waist and select the ideal measurement based on your personal preference as well. Using the escape hole that you left before, insert the elastic band using a safety pin or a bobby pin. Close the elastic band with a stitch and then close the escape hole that you left open. To clean the hem, you have 3/4 of an inch of hem allowance, so you could do a single fold hem, serging the raw edge of the fabric first and then fold it up and stitch it. Since the hem is curved, most likely you will need to add 2 rows of long stitches to close it. In my case, I decided to clean it using a bias tape. Since I was using a lightweight fabric, this bias tape will add soft structure to the hem and make it a little bit flowy. So what I did, I add the bias tape on the right side of the fabric first around all the hem. Then I left an extra amount of bias tape in both ends, so I'm gonna be able to stitch it together and then close it to be able to finish the complete hem. Now we're gonna fold our bias tape all the way to the wrong side of the fabric and stitch it around all the hem really close to the edge of the bias tape. If you decide to use this technique, you need to keep in mind that you won't use the full hem allowance that you have for the pattern. So either you can trim around quarter of an inch from the hem before adding the bias tape, or you can leave it and have your hem probably quarter of an inch a little bit longer than expected. I didn't trim the hem, I left it quarter of an inch and it was okay for me. Give a nice press to the hem and an overall press to the garment, and this is the final result. I hope you like it and happy sewing!